Hi guys, today we're going to talk about training principles in a bit more depth. So in terms of the lesson overview, we're going to go through individuality, specificity, progressive overload, frequency, intensity, duration and detraining, measurable progress and diminishing returns, and variety in greater detail. And you'll know you've achieved success today if you're able to identify the principles within a training program and be able to modify a training program using these principles to be able to generate different gains. So we'll start with individuality. It acknowledges that each individual is different and you need to consider a variety of aspects like ability, gender. So gender, for example, you wouldn't ask a female to go out and perform 400 metre reps at a 52-second pace because that's more like competition pace for most females. So gender is important. Potential in terms of body composition, your muscle composition, your training background, all of those sorts of things. Your maturity level. You're not going to give a written training program to somebody to perform on their own without assistance or supervision if they are young and they're not going to be able to cope with the load. Culture is important. What's culturally acceptable to that person when they can train. Maybe they're not able to train on Sunday, so that would need to be a rest day. What they're able to wear, what movements are acceptable within the culture. Psychological needs. Again, that comes up to maturity. If they need a training partner for extra support, then ensure that that's available. Learning styles. If you're just handing over a written program via correspondence, that's not going to suit somebody who requires demonstration of a certain technique. And the specifics of certain sports and their positions. Specificity is very, very important. So it guides the development of the training program. Obviously, you get what you train for. If you're doing long, slow distance all the time and you're a sprinter, your sprint performance is going to diminish. However, your aerobic capacity is going to get better. So you need to think about specificity. If you're training for cricket and you're never performing the specific skills within your cricket training program, then when it comes to game day, your performance will be diminished. You need to focus on the specific fitness components, energy systems, and the skills required by the sport. It's pretty simple. Develop specific body part fitness for the sport. So if you are a runner, I wouldn't focus too much on arms. They're still important, but clearly not as much as the trunk and legs. Progressive overload is important. You need to gradually increase the load of training to ensure that improvement occurs. And you need to make sure that you start gradually. If you start too hard, there's an increased risk of injury. If you overload too quickly, there's also an increased risk of illness and injury. So you need to train at an intensity greater than your existing capacity, but not too much greater, because you won't get gains if you're training at your existing capacity. You increase things like distance, duration, frequency, and intensity for progressive overload. You might also decrease rest periods between intervals and sets. And the increase in an overload each week should be around 10% to make sure that you're not going too hard or not enough to see decent gains. Frequency, so the number of sessions you do per week. So in order to see improvement in any form of fitness, you should train at least 3 times a week. Less than that will see no visible gains. Aerobic capacity, they suggest 4 to 5 days per week, and for anaerobic capacity, strength, power and speed, 3 to 5 days per week. Intensity, so how hard the session should be. You need to take into consideration the energy that will be expended in a session. Things such as VO2 max, max heart rate or percentage of max heart rate. Rate of perceived exertion is actually really important. So you might have hit a certain target heart rate that you were supposed to hit, and last week that was easy, but this week it's particularly hard. And those sorts of things, observations like that, are very important in a training session because it might indicate that you've trained too hard, you haven't had adequate rest or sleep, and maybe you're coming down with illness. It may also indicate that the progressive overload is working well. You need to consider the difference between sprint training and endurance training, for example. If you're going to increase the intensity of an endurance session, then 95% of your max heart rate, or even, 95% of your maximum speed for a 5K is going to be very, very different than 95% of your maximum speed for a 100 metre. So those sorts of things are very, very important. Duration and detraining. So the length of a training program or session is the duration we're talking about, and a program should be no less than 6 weeks. Generally speaking, we chop that into phases, but we'll talk about that in another video. If you're doing aerobic programs, it should run for no less than 12 weeks in order to see decent gains. And you need to keep in mind that the initial gains, generally speaking, are going to be neuromuscular. So you won't necessarily see changes in body composition or fitness over the first few weeks. Detraining is when training effects are lost, so use it or lose it. Over 1 week of lost training, you may lose up to 50% of your fitness. So a consideration of that, particularly in the off-season or during illness, is important. As we've spoken about previously, you need to be able to measure your progress. That's for a number of reasons. One, to make sure that the training program is going well. Another is to make sure that you maintain motivation. So you need to be able to see that you're making improvements. Think about how you would measure improvements. So in a training program, perhaps you could measure the heart rate during a rest period and see how quickly you are recovering. Diminishing returns. So as we've spoken about previously, gains in fitness are quite large at the start of a program, and they diminish over time as the training program continues on and your fitness gets better. You need to consider how other training principles can guard against plateau though. Whilst the returns get lower and lower, you don't want to plateau. Variety is, you need to vary how you train. You need to be specific, yes, but you also need to change it up so that you don't get a repetitive use injury. So you might do some swimming, some running, some floor classes, some circuit training. Varying where you train increases interest. So if you're a runner, for example, instead of doing the same long distance circuit around your neighbourhood, you might do a run at the beach, you might do some hill runs, go to the park, do some road, do some stuff in the gym and some swimming. Vary how hard you train. You can't do hard sessions every day. You need to mix it up with some easy and some rest sessions for sure. Vary who you train with. That's also important. If you have a set training partner, that's great, but sometimes you might train on your own, sometimes with other teammates, with different teams even. So variety is very important. Guys, that is all of the training principles in greater depth. You now need to start considering how to apply them within general training programs and within sports-specific training programs. Cheers.